Okay.
I was gonna start singing something, and I'm like, there's not a
That's
go-to.
exactly what I was gonna do.
I was gonna start going into like the 1992 cartoon theme music.
I love how we both went there, and it just resulted in silence because neither of us could remember the music. Hi everyone, I'm back with fan favorite.
Who's that?
Pepe the Frog. I'm just kidding, Evelyn's.
We're gonna get canceled for that joke.
Well, you're the one who wears the pin.
They don't know that.
Evelyn wears a Pepe the Frog pin. Go cancel her at Evie I'm just kidding. Hi everyone, how is everybody doing? We are back. It's March.
Marzo.
Did you call it Marzo?
Yeah.
It was good. It was good. I appreciated that. So we are kicking off our DC episodes today. And it's going to be interesting, these approaches.
Detective Comics episodes?
Detective Comics episode? Yes, we're going to be talking about the kitchen all month. I'm just kidding. So I know a lot about the movie side.
Yeah.
But I'm going to be honest here. I'm not coming, like, with comics and comic books, I'm not a very well-versed comic book person. Like, I've only read, like, The Long Halloween, and literally, I think I read Watchmen once.
Honestly, that's more than most people.
Really? Oh, okay, great.
Comics are, like, very deep, like, there's getting into, like, it's really hard to casually get into comics, and I think that's a whole other podcast. Like, one of the reasons I think comics are struggling is because if you're new, like, if you've been growing up with these characters and following them, like, you have an idea who people are, what stories are what, and, like, where to get into it. But if you just walk into a comic store and are like, I want to get into comics, or I want to get into this character, sometimes you can't just go and pick up that character's comic because there's so much.
Well, in comic books, for me, too, it was always a really gatekeepy thing, where, like, I could also never get into comics because everyone would just talk to me about how much I didn't know. Yeah. And then I'd be like, well, forget this, I don't want to do it anymore. But that's where I was so excited about the movies, because I felt like I could access the characters, you know what I mean, and, like, contribute. But I'm not coming at these DC episodes from a super heavy lore perspective, or, like, a super heavy background on them, right? I'm a very casual, like, comic book /fan. But it's gonna be interesting because I have a lot of guests this month because of that, to give, like, that other perspective. So yeah, I have Evelyn on most of the episodes. The only episode I think I'm covering is The Dark Knight Rises. Like, I think that's the only one I'm flying solo.
We'll cover
solo.
My interesting Dark Knight trilogy experience.
Yeah, oh my god, yeah, we're gonna talk about that today and tomorrow and next. Oh my god, I'm struggling. We're going to talk about that today and Thursday. Yes. So yeah, we're kicking off DC month with the Christopher Nolan Batman trilogy. So we're going to be covering, Batman Begins, The Dark Knight Rises, and then after that, we're going to start getting into the DC Cinematic Universe. And I'm just going to be joined by, like, he's been on the podcast before on a couple episodes, Rob Bowen. And then I don't think he's ever been on the podcast. I'm going to be with Stephen Huddleston. He's super amazing. Yeah. So it's going to be super exciting. But, Evelyn's also going to be on it, and I love Evelyn.
Boo.
Boo! Get off the stage! But yeah. So I'm super excited for this month. So tell us about your history with the Batman Christopher Nolan movies, Evelyn.
Okay.
Because everyone is triggered by Evelyn's history with the Batman.
I mean, I guess I should preface, like my history with Batman. I grew up, like, with the like 1992 cartoon, with the, like, I watched the Tim Burton movies, but I watched Batman. What is it? Batman and Robin, the one with Mr. Freeze and everything. Like, I watched that a lot growing up, so, like, that was always my Batman. And then, like, I remember, like, not knowing what to think of the Nolan ones when they came out, but Batman Begins, like, I actually really liked. Like, I rarely bought movies, and, like, it was a movie I liked enough that I actually went out and purchased the DVD. So I was really hype about Batman Begins. And then The Dark Knight comes out, a sequel to Batman Begins, which I was really hype about. And also I was a kid who, like, literally lived comics. Like, my goal at the time was to get into filmmaking so I could make superhero comic book movies. Mm-hmm. And I somehow just never saw The Dark Knight. Like, I just didn't watch it, and, like, never got into it at all. And, like, I literally saw The Dark Knight for the first time, like, last night.
Which was super fascinating. Because, like, I feel like, in my personal opinion, I think The Dark Knight is a grossly overrated movie.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of, like, mythology behind it and everything.
It's not bad.
So, yeah.
It's overrated. That doesn't mean it's bad.
Yeah, oh, no, 100%, yeah. It's like Joker, you know?
Yeah.
I don't think it's bad.
It's alright.
But, you know, it's chill. It's pretty chill. Sigh. It's cool. It's cool. Excellent. So, yeah, Evelyn, tell me about Batman Begins. Because I remember my experience watching the trilogy. Well, at the time, it was just 2 of them. Right?
Yeah.
And so my parents, we were doing a cleaning day, like we did every Saturday, you know, wiping all the walls in the house, cleaning everything. And then they forced us to sit down and watch the movies with them. And I remember I was super into them. I really liked them. Yeah. Like, and that was something that, you know, they really stood out to me as very interesting. And I think in a lot of ways, because we talk a lot about our fascination with superheroes in today's day and age, and I think a lot of credit for that gets given to Iron Man. And I'm a big Iron Man person. Like, I love Iron Man, and I love Marvel and everything. Like, I'm a huge fan of the original, like, Marvel. Like, the original Avengers is my favorite of all the, you know, Avengers movies and all that stuff. But I think in a lot of ways, that cultural fascination and the grounding in reality that you see superhero movies do compared to stuff like, you know, the 60s and things like that when they were big before, was, you know, Batman Begins and the Christopher Nolan series.
And that's kind of an interesting thing, because I remember being, like, I really liked Batman Begins, and, like, I didn't mind, like, I hadn't seen it, but what I knew of The Dark Knight, I had no ill will towards it, but I remember being very salty about that grounding in reality.
Oh my god, yes, tell me more about that, because it's interesting, because as a casual viewer, it was interesting to me to see, like, the difference in the two once, like, because I mean Iron Man came out a couple years after Batman Begins, so when you had as like a super casual watcher, I had the perception and I was sold that and I believed it was for a really long time, but, like, you know, it's whatever. DC was the one that was more realistic and Marvel was the one that was more fantastical, and that's as a casual viewer how I just perceived both the franchises. So tell me a little bit about that from, like, a super...
it's because I think those are definitely the brands they both have. Even though in practice, I would say, like, they're almost the inverse, because, like, Marvel was the company that really pioneered the idea of superheroes are people too, and, like, when they stop superheroing, they have, like, lives and personal problems. Whereas DC were always we're kind of the flagship, like, originators of, like, all the superhero tropes, with, like, being very not infallible, but, like, very sterling characters. And so it's interesting that, like, in more recent years that's kind of flipped, where DC's thought of as being the darker, grittier one, and Marvel's thought of as being more bright colored and optimistic.
Yeah, 100%. And I think the Nolan Batman... Ooh, are you okay?
I just kicked the table.
We
good?
Yeah. Okay. She's really angry about that perception. No, I'm just kidding. I think it's really interesting, too, because going into Batman Begins, the thing that really stood out to me was that it wasn't so, like, fantastical, and there was... The individualism of it really stood out to me. Like, particularly, one of the biggest things for me when I was a kid was, like, when Ra's al Ghul is, like, you know... So, with Batman Begins... Yeah, Bruce Wayne, you know, he loses his parents, you know. It's kind of like Spider-Man, where I'm like, okay, I get it. His parents, you know, okay, I get it. Let's move.
Yeah. I will say this is...
Origin story, but...
Yeah. This is like, I want to say Batman Begins, we get more, like, screen time with his parents than we do in a lot of movies.
That is a really good point, yeah. Which is saying a lot, because we don't get a lot of screen time. But,
I'm going to stop kicking the table also. That might help this podcast.
Jeez, Evelyn, what do you think you're doing? We're professionals here? I'm just kidding. But, yeah, the thing that really interested me, so, yeah, Bruce Wayne, his parents get killed, and he comes up with this plot to shoot the guy who, you know, killed his parents. And the guy is on trial against a big, like, mafia guy in the area, played by Eric Roberts. I think his name's, like, Falcone or something. Yeah. And one of his henchmen gets to the man who shot Batman's parents before Bruce Wayne does. So that sends him into, like, a huge depression, and he runs away or whatever, and he's, like, all, like, grumpy and all this stuff. And he joins this, like, organization called the League of Shadows, run by Ra's al Ghul. Yeah. And Ra's al Ghul kind of, like, trains him to be a ninja, I guess, pretty much.
Yeah.
And the thing that was always fascinating to me, and the thing that really resonated with me, and what made me like it so much, was how individualized the creation of Batman Batman was. And why I say that, like, there's this quote Ra's al Ghul has, and it's like, the will to act is everything. Nothing else matters except your willpower. And that was always something that really resonated with me and stuck with me and made me, I guess, look at the idea of superheroes in a completely new, different way.
Yeah. And I guess that, like I'm gonna be the person who keeps like bringing like weird comic book history into
That's
stuff,
exactly why I need you here, because I can't do that.
But like I think like Batman comes from an interesting time because the way like a lot of the first masked hero type characters we got weren't really superheroes as much as they were characters like the Green Hornet or the Shadow, who were guys who like just had a mask and a costume and like a gun and went out and fought like,
let me get my gun.
My gun.
My gun.
Little TikTok humor.
Oh my god.
But they were characters who were still like very non-super people who just decided to act for that reason. And then I can't remember the exact year Superman came out, but it was in the 30s. Superman came to the forefront and introduced this idea of like, that was when the idea of superheroes, like people with these mythological magic scientific powers, kind of started catching on. And Batman comes from kind of the in-between point where like Superman had come out, but Batman is very much cast from that mold of like the superhero costumed hero. And so yeah, and I guess the Nolan movies kind of...
Sorry, weird question before you finish that thought. Could you hand me that pink thing? Thank you so much. I appreciate you. Yes, the Christopher Nolan movies.
Yeah. And so like as odd as it was that they kind of walked things back and started rooting things more in reality and in sort of in individual will and I don't know, is terrestrial the word?
Terrestrial is a solid word, I think.
Terrestrial things. It does fit the precedent, I think, that Batman was originally kind of created into.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's also super interesting looking at, too, like, because, you know, we talk a lot about DC, you know, like we just said, DC being the more serious one, I guess, the more, like, nitty-gritty, like, we're not here to laugh, we're here to
it's like,
solve crime. But, like, I mean, look at the Joel Schumacher ones that those are the ones I grew up on, and that's, like, completely antithesis to what I perceive, you know, Batman as being now.
Which is also another, like, history thing, because I think... We were talking before the podcast about how Batman is interesting because he's a character who, if you ask 10 people what their idea of Batman is, you'll probably get like 10 to 12 different answers. Mm-hmm. And a lot of that is because the character's evolved so drastically over time, because and a lot of it has been reactionary, which is interesting because you have the original Batman, who's a fairly dark costumed superhero. And then as we get into the 50s and things start becoming more kind of silly in the Silver Age of comic books, Batman gets a little more silly. And then we have the 1960s Batman Adam West show, and that's very campy. And then that's that Adam West is kind of the people's idea of Batman until the early 80s, or I think it was the mid 80s. And then Frank Miller is like, everyone sees Batman as this campy character. That's dumb. And so he makes this really dark, gritty, edgy story and makes Batman a dark, gritty, edgy character. And then ever since, like, all these interpretations of Batman have kind of run the spectrum from the more campy, silly side to the more serious, gritty side.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think for the most part, the Dark Knight trilogy kind of toes that line, because they never get campy, but at the same time it never felt like they were being edgy for edginess' sake. Like things were dark and like rooted in realism, but that it made sense within itself.
Yeah, I definitely feel that way about the Christopher Nolan series, but I do not feel that way about the DC Cinematic Universe.
Yeah.
Which is like a conversation that we'll talk about like a little bit later. Batman vs Superman. Yeah, it's super, super interesting to see these characters ebb and flow and develop. But because like when I looked at like the 90s or like the 90s iterations of Batman and stuff compared to the Christopher Nolan series, it was really fascinating to me to see like one, the difference in tone, kind of like you were talking about, but like the difference in what the movies wanted to do.
Yeah.
So like, you know, you have the Joel Schumacher Batman films that you know, you have like the joke that they were there to sell toys and things like that. But I do think that that's overarching in its purpose when you look at like the history of it versus something like Batman Begins, where you see like movies in a new age seeking to focus more on the individual, I guess, rather than, you know.
Yeah.
Because it's almost like I could understand why audiences started to resonate with it so strongly, because in a world that people perceived as like so bad, you know.
Yeah, it's definitely a post 9/11 type movie.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. Yeah, because it puts the hands into the people. So in a way, it's like it's I don't want to say productive escapism, because I don't think that fully encompasses it, but that's the term I'm going to use. Productive escapism in that people are going to see somebody rise up above society, breaking the rules, and so that they can be like, oh, it's going to be fine, you know?
Yeah.
In a very like 1930s kind of way, you know?
Yeah, I was just like, I guess we'll get to that. I had a thought, but I'll save that for the next episode.
Tell me. If it's for the next episode, don't speak yet. I'm just kidding. But yeah, so you want to talk villains?
Okay, yeah.
Scarecrow?
I forgot, what's that actor's name?
It's like Cillian Murphy, Cillian Murphy.
He's a guy.
I don't know how to pronounce it correctly.
I always see him in things, and I'm like, oh, hey, it's that guy.
How dare you? He is a treasure. He
has those like.
You mean you watched In Time with Justin Timberlake and Amanda Seyfried and didn't say?
What was it? The girl with the pearl earring, I think, had him in it.
Oh my god, I love that. He's such a good actor, honestly. But yeah, I just love the way the villains function. It's very interesting to me because like it's interesting that they chose to go with Scarecrow out of like all the villains, you know, they could have gone with, because I think it's very fascinating, you know, going back to this whole tone of individualism and the will to act being everything. It's interesting that then they pair that with a like villain who, and I'm going to say he's the central villain, even though I think it's technically Ra's al Ghul, but it's interesting they pair it with a villain who...
Is it Ra's al Ghul or Ra's al Ghul?
I don't know. I think they say Ra's al Ghul.
Like, I think they say both.
I think they say both. Yeah, it's like a...
Because, there was a Batman podcast I was listening to, and they like went back and forth on that.
Oh, really? Oh my god, yeah, I'm not sure. The guy who is played by Liam Neeson. But yeah,
Jinn.
with Qui-Gon Jinn, with Scarecrow, with this character, it's super fascinating that they picked a character who preys on people's fear, but you know, they have this hallucinogen that creates like more fear in the individual, and so even more so this will to overcome that becomes more important. So I think it's really interesting the interplay between the villain and, you know, who Batman is, because I always am very fascinated as a secondary, you know, viewer, as a secondary fan, I guess, or casual fan, why they pick the villains they pick for the movies they pick, because there's like a breadth of them, right? Because I remember I played Arkham Asylum and I was shocked at how many villains there were, honestly. But
same, I read the comics.
But yeah, it's super fascinating to me why they pick the villains they do, and I think sometimes it's more effective than others. And in this particular case, it was a very effective choice to make it be Scarecrow. I also think it might have been shade at the Joel Schumacher ones, because I heard the rumor was that the next one was gonna be with Nicolas Cage's Scarecrow before it got canceled, but I can't confirm or deny that.
No. Man, could you even imagine?
That would be iconic.
Well, we already, like, because we also lost that Nicolas Cage Superman movie that would have been in the same universe as the Schumacher.
We lost a lot of Nicolas Cage. Plot twist, Sherlock. Plot twist, Scarecrow is Superman.
But yeah, I definitely, what you were talking about with, I think Scarecrow is a villain that, especially for the formative kind of stages of Batman, works really well, because a lot of the psychology of Batman is based on personal fear and overcoming that and like sort of becoming something greater. And so you get that nice foil interaction where there's someone who sees fear and fear and uncertainty and sort of takes that and builds something that he can stand with out of it, and then there's another character who just kind of throws himself into that fear uncertainty and just uses it to manipulate others.
Yeah, and it's super, super interesting. Like, I really love how it functioned.
And also that's another thing about Batman I noticed when playing the Arkham Asylum games, actually, was how even when like Batman got very comic booky and started having villains that are like
Riddler,
like someone like Killer Croc, who's a giant mutated crocodile man, or something, things that are more out there, his villains are still, or Clayface, who's like a guy who's made out of clay and he can turn himself into anyone. Like, even those villains still have very like personal psychological roots to why they do what they do. Mm-hmm. And I think that's something that's very unique to Batman, because a lot of villains are like, this person's bad because they are a criminal or because they're insane or whatever. And like, for the most part, Batman villains, there's like a psychology there of, this person had these experiences and maybe they're not always evil, but this is the life they've chosen. Or like, there's a lot more dimension, I feel like, to a lot of Batman villains.
Yeah, I completely agree with that as a casual viewer too, because I always felt like there was a stronger sense of why they do what they do compared to a lot of Marvel villains, where it's like, you know, and I mean, I'm not trying to upset any fanboys out there, where it kind of just felt like a because movie thing or because conflict thing. Yeah. And I do think DC gets there, like, but, you know.
Yeah, and I think that comes from Batman having roots in being a more detective-oriented, like, mystery character at first.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. And I also like the secondary villain. I think Eric Roberts is really great.
Yeah, he's a good.
He's a pretty good actor.
Is he a character actor? Do we put Eric Roberts in that?
I mean, my favorite movie of his is obviously A Talking Cat. So
my favorite movie.
I don't know if that answers your question or not.
My favorite movie is the Doctor Who movie where he played the Master.
Excellent. Yeah, I wish he did more stuff like this, because I think he really excelled. Also, he's a snack in this movie.
I like how, like, 90% of the time Eric Roberts just plays stock Eric Roberts villain.
Yeah, no, 100%. Yeah, I love that. I really like that. And I also really like, the one thing I also really love about this movie that I felt like I didn't get until Emancipation of Harley Quinn was Gotham really feels like a real city. Like, it feels like it's a living, breathing city. And a lot of times in superhero movies, I don't believe the world. I don't believe the broader world, if that makes sense. Like, I don't buy that there are superheroes in the worlds that they're in. And, you know, it really feels like it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I can see.
Because there seems to be a disconnect sometimes in, like, the superhero actions happening and, like, you know, the city they're in. Because it really doesn't... Sorry, my alarm's going off. Because, like, it just feels so, like, disconnected sometimes. So it's really refreshing to see, like, a city really feel like a city that they're interacting with.
Yeah.
I also, a standout of the movie that I think, I told Evelyn this earlier, the two perfect things that I think the Christopher Nolan Batman does is Commissioner Gordon and Alfred. I fucking think they're perfect. They're perfect.
Michael Caine has never been bad in anything.
Michael Caine is a treasure. And so is Gary Oldman.
Yeah,
so is Gary Oldman, honestly. They're so good.
They're solid.
I also love the, like, 80s police-like narrative that Commissioner Gordon is going through.
Yeah.
I always love that.
But, like, I think that goes back to, like, the fact that Batman is a character who's very rooted in, like, as much... He's got one foot... His history is 1 foot in superheroes and 1 foot in, like, pulpy crime drama. Mm-hmm. So the fact that Christopher Nolan took modern crime drama and plugged that back in, like... It worked. It's something that I think if you're a casual comic book fan seems weird, and then you think about it for a minute, and it makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, 100%. And like, let me think. Some of the other stuff too. I really like how Batman's relationship with Ra's al Ghul works, because I think it works as a very interesting spectator like relationship as well. Because I think you have Batman putting him on a pedestal in the same way in which we put these superhero characters on a pedestal in our times of need. And it's really interesting that at the end of this first kind of introduction story, this like, you know, origin story, we get him having to kill his darlings so fast, and that's really, really fascinating to me.
Also, Christian Bale as Batman was kind of he's got a little more grit to him, I think, than the past Batmans, because I think a lot of the Batman actors, they dipped more on the like, I don't know, like, I don't want to say superhero-y, but like
they're a little kitschy in the best way possible.
Yeah, definitely. And he's like,
and that's not kitschy as like a negative term.
Yeah, like his version of Bruce Wayne is definitely a lot rougher around the edges.
Oh my god, it's very campy.
Christian Bale's?
No, not Christian Bale. Before I see it being very camp.
Yeah. And like
in cinema, that is.
Yeah. And also like, just and also considering like the stuff he had done before this, like him being known mostly for American Psycho, where he plays someone who could have been a Batman villain. Honestly, given some different turns of events. Or I want to say
Gotham's just New York.
Yeah.
So I mean, like, canon.
That's the podcast I was listening to. It was like a role playing game with like they had Batman, and then there was Howard Stark there, and they're like, so wait, Gotham and New York and the Starks are there, so like how economically awesome is the US doing in this timeline? But I want to say it was like Equilibrium was like the movie that got Christian Bale cast in this action Batman role. And like, I don't think that has anything to do with anything. I just find it funny. But yeah, he definitely gives a different like dimension to Batman, and like,
and I do like his voice. It is very silly, but I really like it.
Yeah,
thoughts?
I think
thoughts.
I think it's and that's something we could talk about with the Nolan trilogy specifically. Is there are, because I think the Nolan movies were coming out around the time that our modern day internet culture was taking shape.
Yeah.
And so things got like memed a lot more than movies that had come out in the past. And I think that's like the Batman voice. The Batman voice is one of those things that like in its original context it works, but it has been memed so much that I have been robbed of the ability to take it seriously.
And you're like, yeah, that's a fair point, honestly. I completely feel that.
Yeah, and I think not as like Batman Begins didn't get memed as much, but like when we get to the Dark Knight, that really starts kicking in.
Yeah, the Dark Knight's interesting. We'll talk about the Dark Knight next episode, but I have a lot. I don't know.
Yeah, but
yeah,
it's
also
interesting.
How do you feel about this added character, Rachel Dawes?
Yeah, I honestly I forget she's there. Like when I think of the movie, I forget that she was in it.
Honestly,
I'm like,
same, and I feel really bad about it.
Isn't that? Oh, hey, that's that woman who like divorced Tom Cruise or whatever.
That's the one who
good
got
for her,
the
I guess.
Fuck out of that cult. Tom Cruise is a part of. Am I right? Whew, yeah.
Why is that? Like, I remember watching Aquaman and being really happy Nicole Kidman was in it. Why is that like the one theme of DC movies is me being happy that women who divorced Tom Cruise continue to work on stuff?
Right? Oh my god, yeah, 100% agree. It's just it's weird. It's very like, I don't know. They do really well. It's just awkward when people are in a cult. I don't understand.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Anyway.
But yeah, like her character, I think she, like, as far as a female love interest, she at least like had some weight to the plot. Like, she wasn't just there to be there.
Yeah, I really like, because I mean, the whole idea of like the will to act being like this core of the movie, I think it functions a lot with a lot of different people in the film, but I think she's a really strong example of like that applying to somebody who maybe doesn't have the resources to become a superhero. Because I mean, people talk a lot about, you know, Batman, he's just a millionaire and that's why he's able to be a superhero. But I think the thing that Batman Begins does very effectively was, it's not that he's a millionaire and he was like, I'm gonna be a superhero. there's so many other people that have to help him make that happen, or it would not work out. And like, because I mean, you get Morgan Freeman. Who's Morgan Freeman's character?
Lucius Fox.
Lucius Fox, and then you have Alfred, and then you have Commissioner Gordon, and then you have Rachel Dawes. You have all these other functioning parts that allow him to step into that power. So it's very interesting how it's individualized in that, you know, it's all about your will to act, but it also doesn't grossly negate the fact that you need others to help you as well.
Yeah.
And that's something I really appreciate.
An important component of individualism is how it affects other individuals.
Yeah. Oh my god, that's an excellent way to put it, Evelyn. Yeah. But yeah, so yeah, that's
yeah. Also the Bat Tumbler. I remember thinking that car was really cool when this movie came out, and I've just started hating it in the last few years.
Why do you hate it?
Because it's ugly, and every other Batmobile looks way cooler.
Every other Batmobile is,
and that's like
epic.
Again, like I want to stress that I was 2008. I was like 15, like 14, 15 when these movies were coming out, so my perception may be a little colored by that.
Honestly, that's a fair point, honestly. You know, that's okay. I'll allow it. But yeah, I don't know. I think Batman Begins is a very effective movie. I think it's very aesthetically strong. I think it's a really good start, and I think in a lot of ways it doesn't get enough hype for how much it actually did to really bring superhero movies back to the cultural conscious in this new post 9/11, like you said, Evelyn.
Yeah, because it was a big deal. Like, because I remember like people not only talking about this film, but it definitely. Yeah, because when Spider-Man 3 came out, I think maybe a year or two before that, and it was kind of like because I think the first Spider-Man Tobey Maguire movie was like 2001, so it was like immediately post 9/11, so it hadn't really processed that. Yeah,
and it was hard because like audiences I know had a hard time with it because of the post 9/11-ness and like, you know, like certain, you know, things people were like triggered. So yeah, I get that. Yeah.
But yeah, so.
My favorite movie as a kid, extremely goofy movie, had to be edited because of 9/11, which always fascinated me. I was like, extremely goofy movie.
Grand Theft Auto 3 was going to have a pilotable airplane that they had to cut out of the game because of 9/11. And also, like, they had to push the release date back because of 9/11 because it's set in New York and they didn't want to, like...
That's so sad, yeah. But yeah, so I think that wraps up my thoughts on Batman Begins. I think it's a very effective movie.
Yeah, I feel like I've expressed very few thoughts on the actual movie.
Yeah, tell me about the actual movie. Go for it, Evelyn, before we wrap up.
Yeah, I think it is, like I said, it did make Batman darker and grittier, but in a way that was organic to, I think, the story. And so because I always think of the Nolan movies and get salty about how, like, I felt like they were kind of that. There's an era where, because I think superhero movies for the longest time tried to kind of be in denial that they were superhero movies.
I think that's how they are now.
Like, well, it's come full circle, because for a while, like when Marvel first was kicking off, it was like, okay, these are movies that embrace their comic bookness, and they're like, we'll have a talking raccoon, and we won't like alter that from the comics in any way, shape, or form. And like it was really and it really shifted things, because before then there was always this idea that like you can adapt a comic, but you have to make compromises and you have to change things. And I think these Batman movies are interesting because they're kind of that transition where they were like they still felt like they needed to change things to make a comic book into a film.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they also did it in a way that was very respectful to an understanding of what made the comic books work.
Yeah, that's a fair point. That's a very fair point, Evelyn. I see your point.
Also, like, I feel like just ever since our James Bond marathon, I'm plugging everything into this. But, like, I never realized with, like, some of the globe hopping in this and the next one, how there's, like, an aspect of that, like, James Bond, like globe hopping adventure kind of thing going on, where he goes to Asia to train with the ninjas and then comes back to Gotham, and that might just be me.
I like that a lot, because I feel like all of us, like a lot of like comic book movies are just very like, and this happened, and they have magic powers, or you know what I mean?
Yeah, I guess as an origin story, Batman Begins, I think, works very well as, like... I think for the most part it does, like, focus on his character arc very well, because that's the thing with superhero origins, is a lot of time they end up stumbling because they're like, well, we need to give enough time to establish who this person is as a superhero, and then we need to introduce the villain and, like, have it be a whole second mini movie that establishes the adversarial relationship between them. And I think Batman Begins did a really good job of, like, making everything work in a fairly seamless way, where we establish who Bruce Wayne is and who these villains are that he's fighting against, but nothing takes away from each other.
Yeah, 100%. I agree. And also, yeah, like I said, I think the Christopher Nolan Batman movies do a really good job of picking what villains to introduce and where.
Yeah.
As much as I don't really like Joker, spoiler alert for the next episode. Yeah, thanks guys for watching. We'll see you guys on Thursday with our episode on The Dark Knight. Ooh, hot takes. Evelyn's first time. The Dark Knight cherry. I can't believe you even consider yourself a cinephile and not having seen The Dark Knight. It's a cinematic masterpiece.
If we talked about the number of, like, mainstream films I have not seen.
I'm just kidding. Evelyn's what we call a hipster, as much as she doesn't want that label. I've heard Evelyn say multiple times. I haven't seen that because everyone else saw it.
Okay, I feel like I haven't said it in that specific way. I might have expressed that sentiment. I have never used those words.
I'm gonna start recording our conversations, Evelyn. That's it. I've decided. I've made the decision. I've made the decision. But yeah, okay, bye.
Bye.